Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today is my first wrap up of 2022. So this is the January wrap up. And what I'm going to try to do this year is make these a little bit more organized. And this was definitely inspired by my friend Alan over at the Library of Alexandria because I really like his monthly wrap ups. I think that he does a really good job of organizing them. And I'm going to try to emulate that a little bit so I can keep them under control. I feel like they always get really long and out of control. So this is my attempt in 2022 to have them be a little bit more organized. So at the beginning of the video, I'm just going to let you know a little bit about what I read, then discuss the books a little bit, and then talk about my reading goals at the end. So we'll just jump into it. And I read 11 books in January. January was a bit of like a start and go month for me. I felt like I had some pockets of really good reading. And this is probably more what my reading is like in real life. So pre-BookTube, before I had buddy reads and I was reading books on specific schedules, my reading patterns would be very much like binge a book really quickly because I read really quickly. So I, read a book in a couple of hours and then maybe not read anything for a couple of days. And that is definitely what happened in January because I and my family were sick at certain times, and so there were a couple of days where I wasn't reading anything, and then there was like a couple of days where I just read a book in that day, and those kinds of like fits and starts are more akin to what my reading used to be like before I organized these buddy reads and felt like I had to read so many chapters of something every day so that I could discuss. So I do like that. I like having that even pacing so that I can discuss with people, but this was a little bit more back to my kind of chaotic reading roots. And I still felt like it was a really successful reading month. I read some things that I really, really enjoyed, but there were some pockets of time where I didn't get to read as much, where I wasn't feeling well, where I kind of just binge watched TV and tried to keep my children alive while our whole household was sick. But thankfully, I was successful. We all made it into February. But of those 11 books, I just wanted to give a star breakdown. I have my reading journal with me here, and I've actually been keeping a tally of my star ratings for the year, so it's actually pretty easy to go through and look at this. But for January, I had 3 3.5 star books, 5 4-star books, 1 4.5 star book, and 2 5-star books. And I feel like that is a reasonable distribution. I don't know how that compares to like percentage wise to my typical distribution because I didn't really track that last year, but I think it made for a good reading month. Even the 3.5 star books, I still had a good time reading them. And again, in order to keep things organized, I'm going to go through all of these books as I read them chronologically through the month. And I just have my reading journal here with me because that makes it a little bit easier, and that way I can ensure that I don't forget anything. Now, the very first book of the year was the perfect kickoff for the year, and it really started my reading month out on a high note because that book was Changes by Jim Butcher, so number 12 in the Dresden Files series, and it was also my first 5-star read of the year. It was my first 5-star Dresden book, actually. I recorded a spoiler-filled reading vlog for that, so if you were interested in watching it, then you can definitely check that out. But Changes was one of those books where people hype it incredibly. When you are reading Dresden, everybody says, just wait until you get to Changes. If you think you like the series now, just wait until you get to Changes. Changes, changes, changes. And so you start to wonder if Changes can actually live up to the hype that people have given it. And I am happy to say that at least for me, it most definitely lived up to that hype. I think this was a phenomenal book. The pacing was wonderful. The character development was excellent. There's a lot of really heartfelt moments in this one. And it really does shift some of the perspective in Dresden Files in order to open up for the greater narrative that I assume is to come in the books that will follow this one. So had an excellent time reading that. It was really fun to record the reading vlog. It was a very intense book to do a reading vlog for, but it made me happy to do it. So I'm thinking of maybe doing some more videos like that in the future. If there are any books that you think will be particularly good to read vlog style, then please let me know. From there, after Changes, I went on to The Bear and the Nightingale. So the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden is a read-along that I have joined in along with Evie's channel, and I participated in the discussion for this first book. There were a couple of booktubers there, and my friend Igor, who has been following along with the channel for quite some time, came into that discussion as well, which was wonderful because that was the first time that I ever got to talk to him face to face, and he added so much to the discussion. He had a really in-depth knowledge of Russian folklore and is just like a very smart person overall. So it was really fun to listen to him talk. I really liked The Bear and the Nightingale. This is one of the ones that I gave 4 stars, and it was just a beautiful, atmospheric book. All of the things that you have heard people say about the Winter Night trilogy are true. This has beautiful prose. It really does make you feel like you've just been kind of tossed into the middle of winter. There's actually a snowstorm here in Newfoundland when I was reading it, so it felt very appropriate to the subject matter. And I have only heard that the series improves from here, that the subsequent books are even better. And I have not yet started book 2, but I am going to be reading that very, very soon. My third book for the month was my nonfiction selection for January. And in my TBR, I had said that I was going to be reading Empire of Pain, which is about the opiate crisis and kind of the development of that. But I actually managed to snag Trevor Noah's memoir called Born a Crime, and I had heard such great things about this, and especially about the audiobook. And I think that Empire of Pain seemed very daunting for some reason at the time. It was just a very long audiobook. I wanted something that was going to be a little bit easier to listen to, and so this is the one that I went with, and I was really happy with that decision. This was one of my 4-star books, and I thought that it was excellent. I did have a little bit of trouble. So the one thing that for me that kept it from being a 5-star book / audiobook is that I didn't really like the disjointed narrative. So we kind of jump back and forth from different points of Trevor Noah's life. And if you listen to the book or if you read the book, you know that he had parts of his life were very difficult. There were some parts that were easier than others. And I sometimes had a difficult time conceptualizing what part of his life we were in. So he lives in various places, and his family is engaged in different relationship statuses at different times. And it was hard for me sometimes to know what part of his life we were focusing on. But it was an incredibly raw, poignant, and really funny exploration of a very difficult time in history, of a young man's life that was mired by so much contempt from the outside world. And I think that he did an excellent job of really inviting us into his upbringing, inviting us into his family, and helping us appreciate some of the really beautiful things that were in his life as well. The book felt like a really well thought out comedy special to me. So that strategy that comedians have sometimes of bringing a joke or bringing a concept or a theme full circle really worked well in this book. And I mean, it's easy to see how charismatic he is, how smart he is, and how genuinely funny he is. So I had a really good time reading this. Personally, there were some beats of the narrative that felt a little bit muddled, and that was the only thing that brought it from a 5-star down to a 4-star for me. But it is definitely an audiobook that I would highly recommend if you are, like me, one of the last people to pick it up, because I know that it is quite popular. That's not really a revelation to recommend to anybody. Book 4 for the month was the channel buddy read. So that was Ninth Rain by Jen Williams. This was, as I said, the buddy read for the channel in January. And I think I had somewhat mixed feelings, but I think it's because I went into this book with really high expectations. So Ninth Rain is the first book in the Winnowing Flame trilogy, which is a fantasy. It's kind of a fantasy amalgamation. Like there's bits of fantasy, bits of sci-fi, bits of horror, bits of a mystery unfolding. And we focus on 3 main characters whose lives intertwine as they try to solve the mystery of what has happened to the land that they live in. They live in a country that has been through various invasions in the past, and these invasions have led to certain members of this country losing specific powers that they had had in the past. Keeping this very vague because I feel like this is a story that you should go into not knowing a whole lot, but this is the setup that we're given as we're kind of post a series of successive invasions, and we are watching the various races that live in this countryside try to discover what has happened to their land, what has happened to their power, what has happened to their ability to fight back, and what is going to happen to them if there happens to be another invasion in the future. It was really unique, very fascinating world building. Like if you are someone who likes really creative settings in fantasy, then I think that this would be a great book for you. I say creative settings because some of the tropes and some of the ways that the story unfolds do feel very classic. These are things that and I'm sure many of us have read before, but the author's imagination and the way that she has constructed her world is very unique. My main struggle with this book is that it felt like a very extended prologue. I felt like we were given a lot of setup, and sometimes things happened in the story that felt like they just needed to happen for the narrative to unfold the way that the author intended. So I felt like the authorial hand was very heavy. I could feel the author pushing the characters along, if you understand what I mean by that. It did not feel seamless and smooth. I felt like I very much was aware that I was reading a story. And so sometimes when the characters acted in certain ways or when certain events happened, it did not feel like it was unfolding before me. It felt very much like I could tell that this was a story that someone had constructed. So if you're able to follow that train of thought, that was my main concern with Ninth Reign. This was one of the 3.5-star books for me, but there were parts of it that I really loved. And I think I was definitely harsher on it as I was reading through and as I was discussing with some friends than I would have otherwise been, because I truly thought that this was going to be a new favorite series for me. I love those mashup type fantasy books. I'm a Dark Tower fan, so I love when things get wacky and weird. I knew that there were animal companions, or at least the promise of animal companions in this book, and there were giant bats. So I felt like this was something that was going to be tailored specifically for me, that I was going to love it. And when I didn't love it that much, I was a little bit disappointed, but I think that's through no fault of the book. And I am absolutely going to continue on with books 2 and 3, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the story unfolds from here. Book number 5 was one of my new releases that I had anticipated for 2022, and that is Daughter of the Moon Goddess. So this is a retelling of a Chinese folktale about Chang'e, which is the moon goddess, and it actually focuses on her daughter. And what we follow in this story is her daughter as she is sent away from the moon because her mother is not supposed to have any company up there. Nobody knew that she was expecting a child. And so when, I guess, the royal family does their check-in on her, she does not want them to discover that she has a daughter. And so she has to send her daughter away to the celestial kingdom and hope for the best, hope that her daughter can survive the court dynamics, that she can survive on her own. And so what happens is that the daughter becomes actually very intimately embroiled in court dynamics because of a friendship that sparks between her and one of the members of the royal court. So it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. This was one of my 4.5-star books, and I flew through it. This is one of the ones where I read it almost entirely in a single sitting. I had started it one day and read like a couple of chapters, and then like the next night I just read it through. I think I stayed up until like 3 o'clock in the morning to finish it because I was so invested in what was happening. And I really loved it. I think a lot of people will like it, but there is one like pretty big disclaimer, and that is that this is very romance heavy. I really like romance. I like it when it's part of fantasy. I like the tropiness, but there are a lot of like very typical romance tropes. There are some romance tropes that I know are not favorites for people and are not a favorite for me either, but I do think that they were carried out very well in this book. And it was one of the examples of a particular trope that I don't like that I actually very much enjoyed in this story. The writing was lyrical. It was very lovely. This flows quite well. It does feel like a fairy tale, so you are covering kind of these huge swaths of time, and there might be a line to tell you that years have passed. And our heroine is very talented. She has a skill for archery. She's very hardworking, but again, it feels true to that fairy tale setting. I think I looked at this through a different lens than I would have if it was your traditional epic fantasy, because I very much thought of it as a fairy tale that was coming to life. And I really loved it. To be honest, I would pick it up again this month. I read it as an e-copy and then I ordered a copy because the cover is gorgeous. And I would turn around and read it again. I will absolutely read it before the second part comes out. This is going to be a duology. And if you enjoy romance, then I absolutely recommend it to you. If you like fairy tale retellings and you don't like angsty romance, I don't think you'll like this, because that is a huge part of the book. And for me, it just made it like heart pounding, and I just wanted to keep reading and reading. Really, really enjoyed it. It was almost my favorite book of the month. It almost made it there. Number 6 was a graphic novel. So I read the graphic novel Lore Olympus in January. This is one that I heard a lot of buzz about following the Goodreads Choice Awards, because I believe this was the Goodreads Choice Award winner for Best Graphic Novel. And this is a modern retelling of the Hades and Persephone myth. I know it was a very successful webtoon that got picked up for publication, and I joined the craze. I had not read any of the webtoon. I hadn't really heard of it until the Goodreads Choice Awards came around last year, but this was another 4-star read for me, and I just thought it was lovely. The color palette was like very much to my taste, like a lot of beautiful pinks and purples and indigos, gorgeous palette. I really liked the art style. It's simple, but I think still very beautiful. And I think even though it is a very straightforward story, I think that there's not a lot of nuance in the storytelling. I think there's a lot of depth given and a lot of attention paid to certain important topics. So obviously, if you have any familiarity with Greek mythology, or really just like any mythology, anything like that is always filled with really difficult topics like sexual assault and mistreatment and punishment and atonement. Like, these are all things that, whatever you're reading in terms of mythology is going to be in there. And I think that the author did a really good job of looking at some of those heavy topics through a more modern lens, and it was super enjoyable. I have refrained from going out to binge the webtoon, which I really want to do, but these hardcover bind-ups are so gorgeous that I am going to try to hold off until the next one comes out, but we will see how successful I am in that. But consider me sold. I am aboard the hype train. I really enjoyed Lore Olympus. And then after that, I continued on with some more Dresden Files. So it was really hard for anyone who has read Changes. You know that it ends with like a fairly big cliffhanger. And I empathize with anybody who had to wait a year or however long it was after that book. But I really wanted to read the next one. So my next read for the month was Dresden Files number 13, Ghost Story. And I really enjoyed this one. I did a full spoiler review for this one as well, talking about why I thought it was the perfect follow-up to Changes. I obviously can't mention a whole lot about it here. This was a 4-star read for me. I really enjoyed it. It's a more introspective novel than a lot of the Dresden novels are, and it opened up a lot of room for character exploration, gave me some insight into characters I really enjoy, and got to see how events from Changes affected them. And I thought it was really great. I can acknowledge that not having to wait for the book, and especially being able to go then on into book 14 as quickly as I would like, probably gives me a different perspective on this one than people who waited that year after Changes and then read Ghost Story and then had to wait, another X number of years for book 14. So I know this one is divisive within the fandom, but I really like it. And I do think that for people who are reading, who are binging through or reading through the series right now, where there are 17 books out, that you will probably like Ghost Story as well. I think much of the discontent was probably due to the anticipation and then knowing that you were going to have to wait again for the next book in the series, or at least that's my theory. Book number 8 for the month was the second read-along on the channel. So this wasn't the official read-along, but it was kind of the secondary read-along on the channel. And that was the first book in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas, which is called House of Earth and Blood. I thought it was called Crescent City forever. The cover design on that book, not great. The synopsis of this book, not great. There are major, major spoilers in the synopsis. So if you've been thinking of reading the Crescent City series, now that book 2 is going to come out in February, I discourage you from looking up the synopsis. I will tell you, this is an urban fantasy written by Sarah J. Maas, so you know that it's going to be kind of high angst. There's going to be an element of romance. There is some, it's fairly campy. I think that it was really entertaining. This was another 3.5 star read for me, and I think I had a really tough time. I struggled with the beginning of this novel because there's a lot of setup and a lot of info dumping, and it is not handled particularly gracefully. But the things that I like about Sarah J. Maas, I knew I was going to get, and I know that I will continue to get them throughout the series, which is that kind of high, emotionally driven, romantic fantasy. And I definitely got that by the end of the book. The last, as slow as I found, or as difficult as I found the first 300 pages of this book, the last 300 pages were so good. It was such a race to the finish line. They were so entertaining, just all of the most dramatic twists and turns that you can envision, and just so over the top in the very best way, which is what I really loved about Throne of Glass. And I'm hopeful that I'm going to continue to really enjoy this series. This was another one that I just binged in a day, read it until 3 o'clock in the morning, was sending messages on Discord being I need to go to sleep. And then, an hour and a half later, nope, didn't go to sleep. So, a book has to be entertaining. If it can pull you in like that and keep you awake till all hours in the night, then I think that says something. And you know what you're getting when you go into a Sarah J. Maas book. I'm not going to sell this to anybody who, was on the fence, I don't think. But if you like those elements that are a part of her work, then I say absolutely go for it. Just be aware that the beginning is a little bit rough in terms of some difficult dialogue. I think she's trying to find her footing in that urban fantasy setting, trying to integrate some of that grittiness from everyday life along with the high fantasy that she has more experience with. So I think that it's okay to have a little bit of a stumble there at the beginning. And I'm really looking forward to book 2, so we'll absolutely read that one when it is released later in February. Number 9. So my 9th book was another 3.5 star book, and this one was Something Fabulous by Alexis Hall. I read this on its release day, so it was released on January 25th. And I, unfortunately, had succumbed to illness. Everybody in my house was sick. My husband, me, our 2 kids, everyone was out of commission. It was the kind of let's watch Encanto 25 times while I read this ebook and try to feed you the food that you need. That was the level of parenting that we were at on January the 25th. And this book was exactly what I needed. It was absolutely ridiculous in the best way. So Something Fabulous is a queer historical romance. And really the best way to sum it up is the author's note. So I'm pretty sure the author's note says something like, this is the most ridiculous thing I have ever written, and everyone is queer. And that's true. That is this was a romp. If you like historical romance, this poked a lot of fun at a lot of the classic tropes. It was very over the top. It knew that. It acknowledged that. That is exactly what it meant to be. It is about a young man who is titled, and he needs to marry a young lady. So he decides to marry his childhood friend. So he was friends with this set of twins, a young woman and a young man, throughout his childhood, and their parents were great friends. And both of their sets of parents have since passed away. And in order to try to live up to their wishes, he extends his hand in marriage. And the sister of the twins wants nothing to do with it. And so she runs away in the middle of the night. And her twin brother, whose name is Bonnie, comes to our main character and tells him that this is unacceptable. He needs to go after his twin. He needs to make this right. It obviously must be something that he did wrong. And so they set off on kind of a cross-country adventure to try to find his twin sister. And as they go off on this adventure, they realize that maybe the twin that he is supposed to be with is not the sister at all, but is in fact Bonnie. And it's just really funny. It's really delightful. It is exactly what I needed when I was feeling so sick and so gloomy. It was so easy to flip through. I think Alexis Hall's writing is really crisp and really hilarious. So I had a great time. If you are feeling down and you like historical romance and you don't mind something that is over the top, then I absolutely recommend you pick it up. Number 10. So actually the last 2 books of the month were actually manga for me. So number 10 was Vinland Saga. So this was volume 1 of Vinland Saga. Vinland Saga is it is a manga, but there was also an anime that was made of this manga. And I watched the anime last year and really loved it. There's just 1 season, which I think is either the first 4 or maybe the first 5 volumes of the manga. I will find out as I continue to read them. But it follows a young man named Thorfinn who is a Viking persuasion, and he is part of a Viking crew. And what we find out through his story is the very complicated history that he has with these other Vikings and how he came to be a member of their crew. And he has an underlying goal that is driving him. And it is a very dark goal. So he is kind of single-mindedly focused on getting revenge for an event that happened to him earlier in his life. And it's really gritty. It's very dark at times. I can't comment a whole lot on the manga and how the development is going to go, but based on what I know from the anime, I really enjoyed the character development. I enjoyed the interactions between the characters. And so far, at least based on this first volume, it seems to be a very faithful adaptation, but I enjoyed that first volume immensely. I am really looking forward to continuing on and extending past the point that I have seen with the anime, because I have really liked what I have consumed so far, and I really want to know where the story is going to go from here. And then the very last book that I read for the month was the final volume. So this is another anime that I ended up watching. So this month I ended up watching an anime called Banana Fish, which I knew nothing about except that it had a ridiculous name, Banana Fish. And so I don't know why I thought this, but I thought I was getting into an anime, like it's a single season anime, it's 24 episodes, and I thought it was going to be something akin to like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I thought it was going to be like a really weird, trippy, nonsensical anime, and I was kind of in the mood for that. That is not what it was. It has a very strange name, but what it actually is an anime that follows a young gang leader who's a 17-year-old boy. And he's a young gang leader in New York City. And he stumbles across someone who has been shot. And right before that man dies, he says the words banana fish to our main character, whose name is Ash. And this triggers a memory of something traumatic that happened to someone in Ash's family. And so he becomes kind of obsessed with figuring out the mystery of what banana fish really is. And coming into his story is a young man from Japan named Eiji, who is a photographer's assistant. And he is there to kind of document Ash as a member of one of these gangs. And they form a friendship. They kind of form a bond with one another. And Ash is very reclusive. He obviously doesn't have a lot of people in his life that he trusts. And so the two of them begin to look into this mystery together. And it is heartbreaking. Like, just the expectations that I had going in, that this was going to be like a weird, bizarre, lighthearted anime, and then the absolute like womp that I got, like the emotional pounding that I took from watching this anime, like the difference, the contrast was stark. So I really enjoyed the anime. I thought it was great. It had some ups and some downs. You're not here for an anime review, but it did start off as a manga in the 80s, actually. So this is an older manga that had a recent adaptation in 2018. And the last volume of the manga includes some content that was not included in the anime. So it includes a prequel story that looks at Ash and one of his friends, whose name is Shorter, who is another gang leader in New York. And then there is a sequel story that follows some of the characters. I think it's like 7 years post the end of Banana Fish. And that was my last read for the month. As soon as I finished the anime, I knew I would have to read that last volume of the manga, so I bought it online and read it. And it was also very emotional. I was not I was not expecting this barrage of feelings at the end of the month, but I really liked it. If you have watched it, please let me know your thoughts about it, because I like I said, what I got was not what I expected, but I had a really good time watching it, and I will absolutely watch it again at a slower pace so that I can maybe pick up on some foreshadowing and really think about how I feel about the two kind of main arcs of the story and take a more in-depth look at it. But the final volume of that manga was my final read for the month. I am still reading Gardens of the Moon, so that is an ongoing book that I am bringing into February and will hopefully finish early in February. And then other than that, I have the books on my February TBR. That is the end of all of the books that I read this month. In terms of reading goals, which I like to kind of compile or keep track of at the end of the month reading spreads, my goals for the year were to read more from my physical TBR, and 3 of the 11 books this month came from my physical TBR. I'm aiming for 50%, so I'm proud of myself, like yay me for reading 3 of them, but like gotta boost that number next month, hopefully. Nonfiction, I did read my 1 nonfiction for the month. I did continue an ongoing series because I read 2 entries in the Dresden Files. I did not read any literary fiction or classics, so hopefully I can find some place in February to squeeze 1 or maybe 2 of those in. And that's it. I hope this format is going to work. Hopefully I will get it a little more streamlined. I'll make sure to timestamp the different sections. And thank you for watching. I hope that you all had a wonderful reading month in January. My personal book of the month was Changes by the Dresden Files, with Daughter of the Moon Goddess kind of coming right in behind it. And I would love to know what your favorite book of the month of January was. I'll see you with another video soon. Bye!